Welcome back, Spencer Sullivan, who is the native Rhode Islander we had on not too long ago, being a former staffer for Scalise after the unfortunate shooting that took place in D.C. But with lean campaign strategies, has his finger on the pulse of what's going on inside the Beltway. And of course, everything that's been on anyone's lips the last couple of days is what's going on with healthcare, and it looks like they are going to be delaying that vote. Spencer, what's the latest down inside D.C.?
Yeah, I think we just saw the most recent update this afternoon that Mitch McConnell just didn't have the vote, so he's going to delay the vote past July 4th and not going to force a vote, which I think is a smart move, keeping in mind what we saw a couple of months ago from the House Republicans trying to force a vote in which they didn't have the votes for and they're having to pull it. So having this time to renegotiate with his caucus, Mitch McConnell, work out the tweaks, improve this piece of legislation, and there's some that was a smart move in terms of working with that. There were also some senators, like Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who was arguing for more time, debating that we need more time to debate this, have my constituents take a look at this. It gives some Republican senators a win on this at the same time. But on the flip side, unfortunately, sometimes in D.C., when legislation hangs out there for too long, it kind of becomes this political quagmire. Opposition grows, people can pick it apart once, and it never goes anywhere. So Senator Mitch McConnell has a very, very talented and is very capable of handling what's coming his way, but balancing the time with giving senators time and renegotiations for this piece of legislation, but not allowing this to hang out there for so long that it just doesn't go anywhere.
Talk to us a little bit, just recently, how much of an impact did the CBO numbers have, sort of sticker shock, if you will, that sort of the press had picked up on? I mean, did folks know sort of what the impact was going to be? Did that have a really big impact, Spencer?
I think the CBO has a track record, and I think that whenever the CBO is going to come out, it's going to make the news of the day. But let's face it, the CBO is not always very accurate. Even with Obamacare, it said 24 million people were going to get insured, and only 10 million people did. So it's this back and forth, and even with the CBO impact, it said 22 million people would be uninsured. But it also did say primarily of those 15 million people would be because of the removed mandate. So now, with this new piece of legislation, the government's not going to force you to buy a government-approved product, right? So when people are not going to be forced to buy insurance because they don't want it or don't need it, some folks are going to be uninsured because they don't want it.
And how quickly, you're inside the Beltway there, how quickly does, and folks, political folks know CBO is the Congressional Budget Office, when they get a piece of legislation, if they go back, not to the drawing board, but if they tweak it, if you will, how long will it take for them to recalibrate numbers if there's a different impact with what they come up with now?
I don't think it takes a long time. I think this piece of legislation took CBO a couple of days, especially in these higher mark legislations. It doesn't take very long. But this is one of those other things where Mitch McConnell can now go back, retweak this bill, which is going to change more than likely the CBO numbers. So the CBO will have to score this bill one more time at least.
And so what do you expect? I mean, what are I don't want to say low-hanging fruit. If they thought maybe there was fruit to be grabbed, they would have gone for it already. But what are the things that are open, do you see, to being tweaked when they sort of, as we say, not go back to the drawing board, but come out with something that might be more viable to get the votes? What are those items that we might see changes to?
Well, I think you have two wings in the Republican Party, right? You have the conservative wing and you have the establishment, more moderate wing. Both sides are relatively unhappy with this piece of legislation. We have a couple senators like Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Ron Johnson, also Senator Dean Heller from Nevada, and also Susan Collins from the Northeast, who are very kind of unhappy with this piece of legislation. What you would want to track is the money. So there's with the CBO score of the Senate version, $321 billion will be saved from the budget, right? Now, this gives Senator Mitch McConnell, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, some money to play with, some money to either make the conservatives happy or the moderates happy, right? And what he's going to have to do is pick which ones. I mean, he has a 52-48 majority right now. He can only afford two defections, assuming that Mike Pence comes in for the 51st vote, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to see where this is going to lead in terms of low-hanging fruit, it seems like the conservatives are a little bit more open to this compared to Senator Susan Collins or the moderates, who might need a little bit more concessions to make this bill go through. So follow the money, and then depending on where Senator Mitch McConnell puts the money in terms of appeasing which party, you can see which way he's making the play for.
And is it, just like you're a campaign strategist, sort of knowing who your definites are, knowing who your highly unlikelies are, and then obviously targeting those that might be that you're able to sway. So follow the money. How quickly after, as I keep going back to the drawing board, how soon do you think we'll see a revised version?
That's a good question. They're meeting with President Donald Trump right now in the White House. They had a 4 o'clock meeting. I think we're going to see a lot more come through that. I would assume coming back after the July 4th recess would be a pretty ideal time, because he doesn't want this. Mitch McConnell wants this bill out there for too long, right? He wants to make sure this bill gets through. Opposition will not be allowed to grow, type of deal. So I would assume after July 4th that would be the ideal time.
After the recess, and so the members are back in their districts and they're out and about. How much work will the staffers be doing next week to really try to hammer stuff through?
Yeah, you saw. Even back with Obamacare back in 2010, the town halls, and you saw some of that in this past year or so with Republican, elected officials. So I think you're going to see a lot of the staffers and even senators themselves listening to their constituents, as they should, right? But trying to probably minimize any mistakes or unforced errors on their part.
And how much, from a media standpoint, again, down there in D.C., just outside of Virginia, how much of a zero-sum game of it is? It seems like there's been so much oxygen now just focused on healthcare these past couple of days. Kind of really haven't heard peep about Russia. Is there just a saturation point of how much the media can absorb and really pay attention to? Obviously not much more important than dealing with healthcare in terms of how what's issues of importance to the country. But does it seem that way to you? Does it seem like there's winners and losers and sort of what's picked as the issue du jour?
Yeah, I think with the media, with how fast the news breaks and the news of the day or the news of the hour, it's only natural for news, for any type of media to capture it, right? We all want the information as soon as possible. We all want that breaking news alert, right? So yeah, Russia's going in the background. It's healthcare today. It could be, we saw a little bit more Syria today. It could be that a little bit more tomorrow. But whatever breaks on the day, I think it's kind of just expected.
Now, is there any talk? Folks are really focused here on healthcare and down there on healthcare, but the accusations regarding Syria, and again, for folks who don't know, the president said that there's indications of a potential chemical warfare attack again on the people of Syria. Any chatter about that down there right now?
Bits and pieces, but like I said again, even with the most recent updates of the healthcare today, with the vote being delayed, that really did overcome most of it. Some of the morning media today did cover, President Trump and the advice to Syria not to proceed with any chemical attacks. But who knows what tomorrow brings.
And as we've had some time now since we last had you Skype in, Spencer, regarding the aftermath of the shooting at the baseball practice there for the congressional baseball game. As the dust has settled, as folks are healing, and again, having been a former Scalise staffer yourself, what has this time brought? Sort of, what's maybe the hindsight now? Is it security issues, gun issues? What are we seeing again now as we're moving somewhat past the incident? But as we know, these incidents do crop up. What are we really sort of hearing today?
Yeah, I think one of the comments I made was getting back, taking a step back, realizing we're all Americans, toning down this rhetoric a little bit, and also realizing at that same conversation that the rhetoric will come back up pretty quickly. And I think you've seen today that rhetoric come back pretty quickly to talking about, this piece of legislation from the Democrats saying that it's going to kill people. People are going to die from this piece of legislation. So I feel like we see that the rhetoric come back up pretty quickly. As I think most would expect, in terms of security and whatnot. I don't think that's going to go too far, but I think, like I said, the rhetoric has come back up pretty quickly and pretty fast.
That is for sure. And of course, 18 right around the corner. Between Trump's approval ratings and between what happens with healthcare. I mean, are those really sort of the top two issues that we're looking at as we're looking at 18 as folks are looking at campaigns and election and re-election campaigns?
Well, yeah, I think it's only natural. I think the best two things that ever happened to the Republican Party was Nancy Pelosi and Obamacare, right? And we've been able to run against those pretty well and pretty effectively for the past 7 years. So I also saying, but realizing that 2018, the political environment can change very quickly. The narrative can change very quickly, right? And I think we're going to see this disconnect even at times with Senate Republican leadership and President Trump, where the American people will blame Congress, but won't blame President Trump for, there's some disconnect there, right? So depending on what the poll numbers look like in individual House districts, congressional House districts, Senate, wise, who knows? I think we're a little bit too early to predict anything, just again, because the political environment just changes so quickly.
It does change rapidly. Again, just hearing today that they are pushing off a vote and to go back and tweak what's going to come out of the Senate. Apart from healthcare, after the 4th of July recess, what else are you keeping an eye on down there, Spencer?
Again, just the environment, just what's going on. Where does this Russian investigation go? What type of tax reform can President Trump get through? A large part of that tax reform that President Trump has promised is based on healthcare reform, right? So making sure healthcare reform gets through, making sure that the premiums and the deductibles don't go as high as they've been going, stabilizing the healthcare market, which will allow the tax reform to take place, is a big part.
And lastly, the sort of fake news story that had transpired linking one of Trump's staffers to Russian connections. Any discussion about that down there?
Yeah, I think it kind of places to both bases. I think, unfortunately, it's one of those things where depending on which way you stand, left or right, you're going to digest that however you want to digest that news story. I think it gives President Trump more credibility. I think it gives those press secretaries, Sean Spicer, Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee, more leverage to go off from. But if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to digest that however way you want to.
And what do you think of the approach of the White House, again, not letting media record video in press briefings? They seem to use this as an instance to say, well, here's reasons why we shouldn't. Why should we give you carte blanche? But what's the thought and the temperature of that down in D.C., again, about their limited access to the press briefings in the White House?
Yeah, I think the most recent fake news story that was retracted gives them more credibility to that argument. However, I do believe having visuals, we're an increasingly visual society, we love pictures and images and videos, to tell a story is very effective. So to cut out the visuals or the story or the media from the White House and just record it online or without visuals isn't very effective. So I think the more visuals, the more images that helps you tell your own story, the more impactful you're going to be.
Do you think that the White House will change their policy anytime soon?
Who knows? I'm not here. I don't think even the White House knows that at some time.
So I'm not going to ask you to be the sort of soothsayer and the prognosticator, but any chatter about who might replace Sean Spicer?
Yeah, I think that the natural succession stories, there's Sarah Huckabee, right? As she goes, she's had more appearances and seems to be getting on just fine with the White House Media Corp. So I think that's the most natural succession story, but who knows with this White House?
Who knows with the White House? Always a lot to keep tabs on, but with everything moving so rapidly this week with healthcare, I'm glad we were able to get you for a few minutes up here. And you're coming back up shortly. If you had more time to spend in Rhode Island over the 4th, what would you be doing?
Going to Block Island. Block Island. Growing up there, and on a couple weeks on the summers, an island I miss, part of the state that you hear all over down there in D.C. and you'd be surprised, but Block Island on the 4th is quite gorgeous.
Yeah, well, we're everyone kind of eyeing the 4th here as this week's kind of ramping up and then winding down. So, Spencer Sullivan, I appreciate your Skyping in today with lean campaign strategies. Cumberland native, appreciate your time. I'm sure we'll talk with you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.